Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to International Conference on Social Sciences and Humanities. I am Sophia Hayati binti Yusoff from University Science Islam Malaysia. I will be presenting a paper entitled Model of Media Ethics for Muslim Journalists, a Preliminary Analysis. Okay. The epistemological and the ethical foundations of contemporary mass media practices are actually deeply rooted in the Western ideologies and philosophies. The major motive behind all mass media structures, practices, and processes is actually based on sales values and governed by the market mechanism. Media code of ethics and watchdog mechanism are ignored by the media practitioners, especially in the West, because they contradict the prevailing social order and hinder the pursuit of private good. So the situation in Muslim countries or of Muslim media practitioners is no different from that of the Western media. Various forms of mass media ethics pertaining to the rights, responsibilities, freedom, and regulation of the press have been debated in European cultures since the introduction of the press in the 15th and early 16th centuries. The new information technologies of our time have tremendously increased the power and function of the mass media, and at the same time have put enormous pressure on media scholars to rethink and redefine the parameters of ethics for journalists and media practitioners. On the other hand, new technologies are democratizing the process of communication between individuals, while they also provide opportunities for the rich and elite to monopolize the information and then manipulate it. Most Western nations, including the newly liberated nations of East Europe, for example, are increasingly inclined towards a market-based theory of responsibility in mass media, which is in fact a theory of individual pluralism. The meaning and values assigned to concepts such as news, truth, objectivity, freedom, people's right to know, and facts may change according to particular circumstances or according to the needs and priorities of a particular society at a particular time. Individual codes of ethics may vary from nation to nation only with respect to national priorities, linguistic constraints, cultural diversity, or the type of political structures. Okay, in practice today, there is no journalistic code of ethics based on the principles of Islam, and few scholars have attempted to define an Islamic framework for mass media ethics. That is why the Muslim Ummah of more than 1 billion has no control over sources of information and the way it wants to disseminate news despite having more than 600 daily newspapers, about 1,500 weeklies, 1,200 monthly news and views magazines, and about more than 500 miscellaneous Muslim publications. So the first international conference of Muslim journalists, which was held in Jakarta, Indonesia in 1981, endorsed a covenant for Muslim media professionals, emphasizing that Islamic rules of conduct should form the basis for all Muslim practitioners in their journalistic endeavors, and Muslim media should work towards achieving integration of the Muslim individuals' personalities. However, such effort and many other efforts done failed to lead to the development to the practice of an Islamic code of ethics among the Muslim journalists. And the reason is because there is lack of support from Muslim governments, lack of interest and enthusiasm by Muslim journalists themselves, and of course, lack of support from Muslim scholars as well as Muslim society in general. So the basis, the analysis that I have made, okay, for the basis for an Islamic code of ethics, there are actually four main bases. The central force in the Islamic moral system is the concept of Tawheed, that is, the supremacy and sovereignty of one God. Tawheed also implies unity, coherence, and harmony between all parts of the universe. But the concept of Tawheed signifies the existence of purpose in the creation and liberation of all humankind from bondage and servitude to multiple variety of gods. The concept of the hereafter becomes a driving force in committing to one God, and the inspiration of as well definitive guidelines are provided by the traditions and the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. A journalist who uses his or her faculty of observation, reason consciousness, reflection, insight, understanding, and wisdom must realize that these are the amanah or trust of God and must not be used to injure a human soul for the sake of self-promotion or for selling the news. A journalist must not ignore God's purpose in creating this universe and various forms of life. The second basis of the Islamic moral system is the concept of social responsibility. Islamic principles of social responsibility is based on the concept of Amru bil Ma'ruf wa Nahyi anil Munkar, or also known as commanding the right and prohibiting the wrongs. And this implies that it is the responsibility of every individual and the group, especially the institutions of social or public communication, such as the press, radio, television, and cinema, to prepare individuals and society as a whole to accept Islam and act upon them. However, in a highly individualistic society that we have nowadays, the press seems to play the opposite role of Amru bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar. Whether Muslim or non-Muslim, the media are more interested in conflict, contention, disorder, and scandal than in peace, stability, continuity, and moral conformity. Unless Muslim media practitioners accept social responsibility as a cornerstone of their profession, no Islamic code of ethics can even be realized. The famous saying, when a dog bites a man, it is not news, but when a man bites a dog, it is news. And this shows how events are treated by the editors. So Islamic news criteria is much more practical and beneficial. Islam equally emphasizes the content, the purpose, as well as the process of news gathering within the framework of the concept of social responsibility that I defined above. But the pursuit of good Islam does not permit not even to a journalist spying or seeking to confirm suspicions, slander, circulation of rumors, or name calling. Islam has established a strong tradition of critical evaluation of the sources of news, use of sound methods of verification, documentation of evidence, and testimony whenever possible, reporting within the proper context and treating the subject fairly. So under certain circumstances, there may be exceptions to some of these restrictions, but they should not become a routine practice or the preferred way of professional practice among the media practitioners. Thus, news may be defined as the reporting of events in a way which fulfills the needs of Muslim society and which leads to peace and stability in conformity with the moral and ethical principles of Islam. Another major concept that determines the boundaries of a professional code of ethics for the Muslim journalist is the ummah or the community. We created you from a single pair of a male and a female, and made you into nations and tribes, that you may know each other, not that you may despise each other. Verily, the most honored among you is the sight of God, is the one who is the most righteous of you. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in the Holy Quran, chapter 49, verse 13, about the need for everyone to live within the community, okay, and to practice the good deeds and to avoid the wrong deeds within the community. Thus, Muslim media practitioners are supposed to serve a larger Muslim community in general and the Muslim individual of this global Muslim community in particular. Therefore, there is hardly any room for the media to propagate hatred and ridicule against other communities outside a national boundary within which the particular medium is operating. Thus, in principle, Muslim media should form a universal source of news and information and serve the cause of unity and equality between all humankind in general and the Muslim community in particular. It is within this framework that Muslim media should be free of regulation and censorship by the rulers of various Muslim countries, because sovereignty of state belongs to God and not to a particular king or president. God Almighty and not kings and rulers guides the human being. Lastly, the concept of taqwa is yet another basis for developing an Islamic code of journalistic ethics. The concept of taqwa goes beyond piety. It raises a person's individual, moral, spiritual, and psychological capacity to a level that the individual becomes immune from excessive material desires. It elevates a person to a higher level of self-awareness. Taqwa should be the underpinning element in the technical knowledge, managerial ability, scientific know-how, and communication skills of every Muslim journalist. Debate and concerns about codes of ethics in contemporary mass communication focus on one issue: who should have the authority to enforce these codes of ethics? Governments, media institutions, or individual journalists? The problem is not the lack of a code. Rather, lack of adherence to and implementation of a code is the main issue. Taqwa combined with a true love of and commitment to God, consciousness of the life hereafter, and acceptance of the leadership of the Prophet Muhammad may provide the ultimate and definitive moral force to practice free and fair journalism. Okay, for challenges, problems, as well as solutions, Muslim media practitioners are actually dependent on the 4 transnational news agencies and wire services that we have currently. Okay, and in a survey conducted previously, it was revealed that most Muslim newspapers in Arabic, English, Persian, and Urdu based 90% of their news coverage on these 4 agencies: the AP, UPI, EFP, as well as Reuters. So 70% of foreign news bureau in Muslim countries belong to the Western news agencies, whereas the number of Muslim countries' news bureau is hardly about 5% of the total. So the strong presence of Western news agencies in Muslim countries discourages media practices that do not conform to the norms of these sources of information. Therefore, it is essential to develop an alternative and viable source of information that will replace reliance on sources of information whose primary objectives are in contradiction with the basic value system of Islam. Unless Muslim media take a lead in the development of alternative sources of information, and unless they show great willingness to accommodate neglected social groups such as Muslim youth, women, children, and the rural population, they will remain confined to a small audience without any practical relevance to the Muslim masses in particular and the world in general. In consequence, the desire to adhere to an Islamic code of ethics would also remain low. It is important to note that Muslim media practitioners themselves have to develop an independent structure. Unfortunately, there is very little exchange of ideas, experiences, and expertise among Muslim journalists, newspapers, and magazines. As a result, already scarce human and material resources are wasted in duplicating similar efforts. Thus, a core group of Muslim media practitioners drawn from various countries could be formed to serve as a media think tank. Such a group should work in close cooperation with those who are actively engaged in defining an Islamic framework for other areas of study, that is sociology, psychology, political science, philosophy, and anthropology, etc., in order to develop a thorough Islamic approach to the process of mass communication. So with that, I thank you and I end my presentation with wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.